First, I'm going to give you a quote before I even tell you about my guest. I am a very evocative therapist. Instead of fixing people's messes, my goal is to elicit feelings people are most ashamed to have, such as hatred and rage. I know that even though feelings are invisible, they don't evaporate, but store away in our bodies until processed or externalized. And that quote is from my guest, Braun, and say your last name because it's fun.
Brownyn and then Schweigert. Yeah.
Yeah, Broadwood. I love your first name. You spell it differently, and I always forget that it's Brownwyn. This is
Yeah.
our first rodeo. So, welcome. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
you're here. We had some technical difficulties, but you're here. And by the quote that I read from your book, right? That's from a book, I believe, right?
I didn't from my
Give a
probably my
website,
blog or my
the blog. I was just going to
my
say, yeah,
podcast. Let's figure it out. Yeah.
yeah, you said it somewhere.
Yeah.
It is you.
Yeah.
And so, what I like about that is I just had a situation with family members where there was something that a resentment and it was never going to get resolved because the other person wouldn't talk about it.
Hmm.
And it got to the point where, of course, that builds. And now uh, it was me that had the problem with this other person who happened to be my husband's brother. So now my husband's mad at him. And now it's getting all yucky, you know. And I said, look, you had to send him a text. You have to show up and sit down and face to face, and this will be done in 5 minutes. You know, just say it out loud. And he came finally, and I did. I've been in enough therapy that I know how to do this stuff. I said, everybody has their turn at talking. Don't interrupt them. Let them finish. You know, and we resolved. And it was like, okay, so you know what you did and you're apologizing for it, correct? Yes. Okay, then I forgive you.
Yeah.
That's all it took. That's all it took. But I don't know if it was a man thing, but I had to go to great lengths. So a lot of this has to do with misunderstanding. So, what inspired you to become a marriage and family therapist?
Well, first let me reflect on what you're saying, that a lot of it's about
Okay.
misunderstanding. I think a lot of it is actually fear based on past experiences. Like if we grew up in a home where it wasn't okay to say, hey, that hurt when you said that. If we got hit or we got silent treatment, if we got punished, if we got gaslit, we got mocked, a whole host of things. But we learn implicitly, I'm afraid of confrontation and we project that onto everyone
Yeah.
everywhere. And we don't realize,
Yeah.
no, there are some people who are safe people who you can confront directly and you will bring resolution. And then, of course, there's plenty of people who are not, but
Yeah.
really need to know, like, each situation is different. And I can learn to trust myself. I can learn to have a voice. And if that person does whatever, that's on them.
Yeah.
That's not on me. And I'm not a little child who's dependent on my parent anymore. So if they decide they don't want to be my friend anymore, I'm going to be just fine. Actually, I'll be all the better for it because I don't
Yeah.
want a friend. If with a friend like that, who needs an enemy?
Yeah. When it's family, it's harder. Get rid of them. But the funny thing that you just said is when it was my turn to talk, I said, I just want, it had to do with my book, which they did not read, but were upset that I wrote it, you
Mm,
know. And I said, I want to tell you something. I did not have the childhood and the family life that you had. You had a lovely family life from everything I've heard and seen the last 37 years that I know you. I did not. I grew up with an alcoholic father, with physical abuse, with mental abuse, and then I went on to men and sexual abuse. And so the first 40 years of my life were not a picnic. And writing this book was a big thing for me. And the fact that you did not even acknowledge it, that's what hurt my feelings, you know. And then that you criticized me for writing it, not to my face, and said, oh, she shouldn't have wrote that book. And it talks about other men in her life.
Mm.
I didn't get with my husband until I was 41 years old. And I already
Mm.
got divorced. So, of course, there were men. Anyway, long story short, I let them know that that's what I was hurt about. And that's important, too. It was for me.
Yeah, I bet you felt relieved after having like spoken that out, right? And that's
Mhm.
even if they didn't appreciate and they didn't respond well, it when we are true to ourselves, it's worth it just to be true to ourselves, you know?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And they did respond. Well, he responded well because, it just happens he's a lawyer. And I said to him, you're a lawyer. If people brought in what they say is evidence in a trial and you look and find out that it's hearsay,
Mm.
do you enter that as evidence? And he said, of course not. I said, well, you did that to me.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant.
That
The
was.
lawyer thing on my own back. But
Yeah.
I think that clicked though. And I said, I don't care if you read the book, but don't like judge me on it.
Mm.
And everything got settled. And I was glad because my husband and him had been very close. So
Mm.
I wanted that. And my
Mm.
husband spoke and he has Parkinson's and he's third stage going into four, and it's hard for him to speak. He spoke and it took a while because he had a pause and all that and slow. But he said very nice things about the book and how he's heard people tell me it helped them with their issues,
Mm.
etc. He really stood up for me. And then
Mm.
after it was all over the next day, he came in the room and he said, thank you. And he gave me a kiss.
Mm.
He appreciated it. And that's part of it. I'm trying to do everything to keep his spirits up with the Parkinson. So we don't need this family dispute, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But
we have a saying in the therapy world, the only way out is through. And, a lot of people will never give that a try. They'll never try to have a healthy confrontation or speak up for themselves. And a lot of people, they don't want to do therapy either because it's scary to feel their feelings. It's scary. Not that we can't ever avoid feeling our feelings, but
mhm,
it's just easier to act like we don't feel them, and,
mhm.
and we call that denial and we
Yes.
dissociate, and then when we dissociate, we get anxious, we get
Mhm,
depressed, or
mhm.
we use drugs or we engage
Right.
in compulsive behavior. We do all these things that are actually much worse than
Mhm.
feeling the feelings. If we could just skip all of
Yes.
that and feel our feelings,
Yep.
because our feelings are designed to tell us what we need. So if
Mhm,
I'm feeling like anger in my chest, then that tells I can just feel it in my chest and go, okay, Bronwyn, why are you feeling angry right now? What's going on? But I want to let you know, like, this is valid. It's valid to feel angry. It's
mhm, mhm.
okay to feel angry. That doesn't make you a bad person. And it's valid. You're angry for a good reason. What do you need? What does this feeling in my chest need? Well, maybe it needs to say, hey, Mimi, what's the deal? Or maybe, so that would be like being assertive. Or maybe it needs to have a boundary. Or maybe it needs to hold someone accountable. Those are really
Which is
what the
exactly
anger
right.
is there. And what
That's
our
right.
feelings do is they help us meet our own needs. They help us become a responsible adult with agency over our lives. That's why we have emotions. They're there to move us. Like the word motion is in emotion. They're there to elicit
Motion.
movement,
Exactly.
motion, right?
Yeah. And I also said to him, I was not taught any coping skills when I was a child. I was not taught correct ways to interact with other human beings. And I drank for 20 years over
Mm-hmm.
my feelings because of what you said. I didn't want to feel them. So I self-medicated. And after I finally got sober and started to do a lot of therapy, guess where it all led back to? Family of origin. It always
Mm-hmm.
does, I think, or my
Yes,
case, or trauma,
I
which
think
I
it
had
does.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
does. And I did. I went to rehab. I I actually went to an eating disorder rehab 9 months later because when you put one thing down, you pick something else up. Put the
Yeah.
alcohol down and pick up the food.
Yeah.
And 5 years sober, I got very depressed, and I went to the Caring Foundation that has a wonderful program, and it's intense. They only take 5 people, five,
Mm.
and it's for 5 days.
Mm.
Work they do is like gestalt and uh,
Oh.
all the role playing, and
Uh-huh.
it's
Yeah.
made had me scream and like feel every feeling, and when you're ready, scream.
Yeah.
And who wants to go first? I went first. Oh my God. I didn't even hear myself. And when it stopped, everyone there, they were like the face on them. They said, "Oh my God, I can't believe that came out of you."
Yeah. Well,
That
I think
takes
though,
work,
I think that yeah, I think that is can be very therapeutic, but I also think a lot of people think that that's what you have to do to feel your feelings is like find, a padded room and scream into, oblivion or go to what they call a rage room and break things where you pay to break things. And the thing is, you don't. You know what actually helps in the moment is saying, I'm frustrated. Like when I am working with like, let's say a customer service rep for like some
Oh,
technology stuff, you
stop
get
one.
frustrated. So what I do is in my email, when they haven't actually read the email, but they'll respond multiple times in the same way without actually having read it, obviously, because if they had read it, they wouldn't respond like they do. I will send a next email and say, I'm frustrated. Or I'll say actually, this is frustrating. I don't feel heard. And that's being very assertive. I'm saying I'm frustrated, but I'm not attacking them. I'll say, this is frustrating. And so I'll tell my clients, all you need to say in the moment, if you're feeling that way, is like, this is frustrating. So if you have a kid who, just came home and got an F on her report card, you can just say, this is disappointing. Don't attack them.
No.
Don't like, just say, this is disappointing, this is frustrating. And then it's a win-win because you feel better because you just put your feelings into words. And when we express our feelings into words, they
Oh,
actually leave our bodies. They leave our bodies.
yes.
They're not hanging out, stagnating inside of us, making us sick anymore. Those feelings now are
Uh-huh.
catapulted out into the
Yes.
ether, and they're not inside of us, and we feel relief. So that's all we have to do is say,
That's all I have
I'm
to do.
frustrated, I'm disappointed, I'm confused,
Yeah.
whatever, in the moment.
Right, right, right. Almost every therapist that I ask has said they have read this book. The body keeps the score.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what you're talking about. And it's true.
yeah.
When you don't say those things or act upon those feelings, that's what they store in your body. And then you end up with, like, I have autoimmune disease, I had breast cancer, I had a lot of
Mm,
illnesses. And,
yes, yes.
but I'm undoing 40 years of harm,
Hmm.
you know, and I'm 76 now. So I've been working on myself for 26 years. Now,
Yeah.
that's it, maybe more.
Well, I have some
36 years.
awesome, I have some very inspirational anecdotal stories to share with you, Mimi, about
I
that.
want to hear that. Okay.
Yeah. So the first one, I myself had insomnia for about 30 years. I mean, it
Oh,
was, oh yeah, it was
awful.
so bad,
Yeah.
off and on, but a lot of on. Anyway, when
Mm,
I finally, and this was just a few years ago, when I finally woke up to the fact of how abusive my father is,
mm,
and I allowed myself to feel angry and I allowed myself to see him as a peer instead of like a god, how we see our parents as gods. Like I took him off the
yeah.
god throne, saw him for who he really is,
Mm,
and then held him accountable and said, if you want to continue having any relationship with me, I need you to apologize. I
yeah.
need you to become a safe person. And he chose not to. He opted out. So then cutting off all communication altogether, that was his choice. But the minute I started doing that, I was able to discontinue my meds and sleep like a baby. I sleep like a baby now.
Oh my gosh, isn't that
So
wonderful?
that's one example. And you know what I think? I think insomnia is our inner child trying to wake us up. They're like, wake up and smell the coffee. Like, see, this person is abusive.
Yeah.
See what I see and be true to me. Like our inner child is like, be
Yeah.
true to me.
Right.
And I wasn't for 30 years. I wasn't. And so that was one example. I have a client who, when she started with me a couple years ago, she had psychosis. So she had hallucinations, which is like pretty serious.
Yeah.
They were very debilitating. She was on so many meds. Some of the meds are so strong for psychosis that she was told she can't have children because the meds are incompatible with, having any healthy pregnancy. So anyway, we start working together, and she's finally able to see how what a monster her mother is, and she cuts her out altogether. That was about a year and a half ago. The minute she did that, her psychosis went away. She was able to get off all her meds. She and her husband are going to be able to conceive and have their own baby children.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So those are two examples. I had
Yeah.
another I had another client who had a month-long headache that she had a doctor's appointment for. We met on a Tuesday. Within the session, the time we met, the 50 minutes, her headache was gone. And she's like, I might have to cancel my doctor's appointment. Well, she texted me on a Friday. So 4 days later, she goes, I'm canceling the appointment because it stayed away. Like it left during our session.
You can
So
talk
all of
to her.
those
Yeah.
things,
She let it out.
yeah, all of those things is our body speaking to us. Our body is always trying to communicate to
Yep.
us. And I think headaches are our body saying, I'm angry at this thing or at you, and I
Mhm.
need you to listen to me. I need you to hear me out. This is what I need you to do to move us forward. Those emotions are there to move us, right?
Yeah.
And we really, really need to listen to our bodies.
Oh yeah. And the thing of it is, the sorry part of it is that we don't know that a lot of times. And we self-medicate like I did.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then to find out when I got sober by the blood work and everything that I have chronic depression. And of
Mhm.
course I have a panic disorder because of the trauma I have. I have like a
Mhm.
PTSD. So that's what I was doing. But alcohol is a depressant. So
Yeah.
you're depressed and then you drink and you get more depressed, you know. So I got out of that cycle. Thank God, thank the universe, whoever helped. But I mean, seriously, there's work to be done. She went to someone, and I always say when well, I was a sponsor in AA for years up until recently, and I always say talking is the best therapy. To tell another person splits the importance of the problem in half. The minute you open up to one person, I had a woman come to do her fourth step with me, which if you know about AA, that's when you tell your sponsor all your things you did, you know. And I'm like, I think it's the fourth step. It's been a while. But anyway, she
Yeah.
came and tell me all her things. And I listened and I take my time and we talk about things and then the person leaves and they're done. Well, 5 minutes later, she came back. And she said, I sat in my car and I couldn't go because I kept something.
Mm.
I was too ashamed to tell you. And I said, well, I'm so glad that you came back and that I think you're going to tell me because now you really will have the relief. And she told me. And that was good. That's what she had to do. But thank God she knew that because,
Yeah.
the body would keep that score, you know.
Yeah. So when you say that, I think you're right. Ideally, it
Mhm.
is that when we express those feelings into words and we share them and put them into words, but only if that person validates us. So if we have an invalidating person who's like,
Yeah.
let's say you're really angry at someone, but I'm like, well, look at it from their perspective. Well, that's actually invalidating. If I'm trying to get you to see it from the other person's, I'm not validating you. And my job as a good therapist, as a good friend, a good parent, is just to validate first. First, we start with like believing that person, going, you know what? I hear how angry you are, Mimi, and you have every right to feel like that. I don't blame you. And then, because what that does is it calms the brain. It
Yeah.
calms especially the limbic brain. And what happens then when you validate someone and they feel heard and they feel understood is their own prefrontal cortex then comes on the scene, like it switches on. And then they'll kind of pause afterwards and maybe they'll say something like, you know, maybe I should look at it from their point of view. And then they're able to do that on their own. So
Mhm.
when we think that's our job, it it sabotages it because
Yeah.
that's really that person's job. First, we just start with validation. And
Validation.
then,
She
yeah,
trusted me, and I'm not a judgmental person, which you
yeah,
already know. I had been responsive for a long time.
yeah,
And the thing was, something a lot of women do, and I'm not saying who it is, so I'm not, letting any secrets out. She had an abortion when she was young, and she was Catholic, and it haunted
mhm,
her,
yeah,
and she couldn't even tell me, another woman that was
yeah.
supposed to be her, her person.
Mhm.
But she knew enough to know she couldn't keep a secret. If she kept a secret, she'd stay sick. And we had a wonderful conversation after that. And I knew she left feeling loved and not judged and heard, like you said, heard.
Yeah.
That's so important, you know. But
Mhm.
so when you, like, in your practice, this is just my own uh, knowledge, do you see more women than men?
Yeah, for sure. Many more women. Or the only, I do
Yeah.
have a few men, but the most in general that therapists see men is when they're part of a couple and the wife is dragging them to
That's right.
therapy. Yeah.
That's right. I had two ex-husbands, and at the end, they both grudgingly went to couples therapy and didn't say a word, which didn't help them much because then I divorced them. But my husband now, I wanted him to do therapy because of the Parkinson's and the extreme depression he has.
Mm.
And he fought me on it. But then I got a therapist on Zoom, and they had a couple conversations. And I was in the other room with the door closed, but I could still kind of hear. And it was like somebody talking about the weather. Like you could tell they weren't getting into
Um,
anything. And
yeah.
I told my therapist about it. She said, well, I could see the first session just getting to know, let him feel safe and, talk about non-threatening things. But
Yeah.
he's on his third session. So he said, I don't really want to do this. I said, you don't have to. But
Yeah.
men resist. I always see that. They resist.
More so in general, I will say, I think there's a reason for that. And I think that's because historically, little boys are shamed for crying, for showing any type of vulnerable
Yes.
emotion. And little girls are allowed to cry, but you know what they're not allowed to do is show anger. So my female clients,
Yeah.
they'll come to me and they can't show any anger, but they'll cry in session. I'll say, are those sad tears or angry tears? And they're like, oh, these are angry tears. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, because you were allowed to cry as a little girl, so that you showed your anger by crying. But unfortunately,
Yeah.
yeah, I think when little boys are taught as young children, my vulnerable emotions, my very most vulnerable self is shameful, then that shuts them down for the rest of their lives. It
Yeah.
shuts them down forever. And so I think that is why fewer men seek out therapy than women because they've shut themselves down. They shut
Yeah.
themselves off. Hmm.
Oh, I believe it. And about the tear things, I don't cry. I don't cry at sad movies or anything. And my husband does cry. And the only time I cry is when I'm angry or frustrated. And I have to be extremely frustrated and extremely angry. And then I will cry. So that has a lot to do with areas that I'm still working on. Okay. But I would love to cry at a sad movie. Like I'll sit there and I'll say, oh, this is sad. I should be crying.
Interesting.
I don't, and it's okay. Um, I
Hmm,
also found out I have Sjogren's syndrome, which that might have something to do with it because you don't produce enough liquid to cry.
that might be it.
Yeah, well, I am treating that. But emotionally, I think I kind of locked myself away for so many years and deadened my feelings with alcohol for so many years and built a wall. I have a couple bricks yet I got to take out the wall, But yeah, I wanted to ask you that question because I already knew the answer. Men just don't want to go to therapy. It's crazy. So you deal with a lot of different disorders, panic disorders, depression, bipolar, eating disorders.
Yeah.
What do you feel is the most challenging for you to work with?
Um, I I haven't found, I would say those things are all what we call axis one. Axis
Mhm.
two is like personality disorders. Those are like very, very challenging. So like someone with borderline personality disorder, I mean, you can't really work with them unless they're willing to have insight, but the whole personality disorder is them not choosing not to have insight. So that is just one I won't really touch.
I have a relative. I believe that is her situation, and she's always gaslighting people, and no matter what, and she sees it a different way, or someone has a situation or a problem, and she turns it around that it's about her, that it's bothering her, it's disrupting her life because this person's problem, and that's what I think. Well, I say she's a narcissist, but definitely something's off there, definitely. But, and I also have another relative that's bipolar, which is another tough one, I think, because they don't like to take their medication. Now, that's
Yeah,
my
I
opinion.
do. I think a lot of people with borderline, though, are diagnosed as bipolar. I've seen that often.
Mike, it's funny you said that because I was just wondering if, you know, because they're related.
Because true bipolar isn't that difficult to work with because they're just, they might have mania every once in a while. They're mostly maybe depressed, but some of them are just fine most of the time. You just never know what you're going to get. But
Yes,
but I think a
yes.
lot of borderlines are diagnosed with bipolar, and so I'm just wary when people say they have bipolar. I'm like, do you really have bipolar or do you have
You mean
borderline?
that? Oh,
Hmm.
I see what you're saying. So
Hmm.
they're not diagnosed as it. And that's, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So borderline, I mean, what kind of a mental illness would that be classified as?
It's a
Like, it's,
personality disorder. It's a lot. It's to me, it's the same as narcissism. I don't draw a distinction.
yeah,
A lot of attention-seeking behavior. Oftentimes they'll, like you're telling me this person you were referencing will put down other people and see how it bothers them. It's all about them. I mean, it is
it's
like
all about them.
narcissism. It's all about
Yeah,
them.
yeah. And there's really nothing you can do. You just have to realize that's who they are and, stay clear, I guess.
Staying clear is really what I think is the best option. The other
Yeah.
thing is if I have to, let's say I had to work with someone in an office who had borderline and I figured it out and I can't stay clear because I had to work with them. I have a whole podcast episode actually about this for people who can't have a boundary with a
Oh,
borderline.
you have
Um,
an episode about it? Did you say
yeah, for people who can't draw a hard and fast boundary with someone with
this?
borderline, there's
And
other
where do
things
we
we can
find
do.
this? Where do we find this episode? I'm interested.
Oh, so my podcast is Angry at the Right Things.
Oh, of
And
course. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's Angry at the
We
Right
talked
Things.
our last podcast, that was the title. Angry at the Right Things, right.
Yeah.
And that
And
is a podcast.
the episode is called How to Tame a Dragon. So that's how to deal with people
Wow.
who are borderline. If you can't cut them out, there's other options.
I got you. I'm gonna definitely watch that one. Yes. Big
So what
story.
you do, a borderline cannot tolerate is a mirror. So if let's say you're borderline and we work together and you're like trying to shame me That's what they do, is they shame dump onto people. And so if I hold you accountable in the moment, if I look you in the eyes and go, you know what, Mimi, we both know that's not true. They
Mhm.
can't handle it. That's how you tame the dragon. And that's one of the ways, is just being a mirror and showing them, I
Mhm.
don't believe you. I see you. Like, I
That's what I
see what
get.
you're doing.
Yeah, I get the gaslighting thing then because they tell me an opposite thing happened that did not happen, or I didn't say that. I never did that. I didn't say that. And I'm like, oh my God, yes, she did,
Yeah, I had a friend who was a former friend who was borderline, and I said something to her, and she starts laughing. She goes, I never said that. You're lying. And I go, that is a direct quote. And I just held my ground. You just hold your ground and you don't back down. And then
Yeah.
they'll feel their shame and they cannot tolerate their own shame. And so they won't mess with you after that. They won't mess with you. That's how you deal with them.
Is this something that you're born with, or does it come about because of circumstances?
It's an attachment disorder. So it comes from, a lot of neglect, unfortunately, and usually in the first year and a half of life.
Really?
Hmm.
Is there any other way that it comes about? Is that the only thing that you've
It's from neglect for the most part. It could be a little later, but it's from, yeah, neglect.
and would it have I think parent when you say that it would be
Yes,
neglect
and the parent could be a good parent, but the parent, let's say, well, I will say this. So in the olden days, people had a boatload of children. They just didn't use birth control, or
yes.
they didn't have birth control, or a combination, but
Mhm.
they didn't. And like, if you have 12 children, you can almost guarantee all 12 of them will have an attachment disorder, because they are not getting the attunement that they need, from the optimal attunement from that parent. They just aren't. They're not going to. So it's not that the parent was necessarily neglectful, but in that situation, there's just a lot of neglect, unfortunately.
So example hypothetical, here's a single mother with a few children, not getting child support, and she's struggling to make a life and raise these kids without any money. And of course she has to put them in daycare so that she can work, you know and maybe she is trying to better herself, so she's also going to college, which
Mhm.
means when they get home she wants to do her homework, do as much
Yeah.
as she can while they're in daycare. But would they consider that neglect? I would probably
Well,
say.
I mean, that's like, we're trying to make this metric that's somewhat arbitrary, because it depends. If that mother came home and when she did have time, she said, "You know what, little kids, I have so much on my plate, but I'm going to prioritize you for the next 45 minutes. I'm giving my full attunement, my full attention, because you matter." Then it's
Right.
not neglect. So it's not really a quantitative thing, because
Yeah.
you could also have a mother who's at home all the time, but
Mhm.
she is either depressed or she's got a personality disorder of her own. And she's just not, she's there, but she's not there. And that can do the same damage, if not worse. So I don't
Yeah.
like to kind of say
Yeah.
working mother, stay at home mother. Like, I don't like those categories anymore, because they can really be very, very confounding.
Right. Yeah, that's a tough one. So it isn't something you're born with. It is obtained through that attachment disorder. And I
Mhm.
have to see this podcast. I definitely, I have a few people I can, I have to make an appointment, but what state are you in?
Oh, yeah, I'm in California.
Yeah, we could do a Zoom appointment.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's interesting. So, what do you find most rewarding about your work?
Seeing people come to life.
Mm. Hmm.
I mean, just seeing people, I used to say coming back to life, and now I'm like, no, they're not coming back to life. They're coming to life. Like, people who have just never really connected with themselves, just really, connecting, like that client I told you about that has psychosis who came to life and said, "Oh my God, my mother's a monster. I can cut her off. I can do this for myself. I'm worth doing this for. I'm worth protecting. I'm worth fighting for. I can feel my anger. That's what anger's for. It's to help me protect myself, and then coming to life, once she's just really filling out her very core self. Like that's what I see when we start to feel our feelings and move towards them instead of away from them and let them give us wisdom onto what we need, then people come alive. They come alive for the first time oftentimes.
Yeah. Well, that would be rewarding. That would. And how do you like your own mental health and self-care while you're doing all this, while you're supporting others? Like, how do you take care of that?
Well, I love what I do. It doesn't drain me.
That's
So
good.
I think honestly, it gives me a lot of insight into myself. That's like I'll kind of notice a lot of things. We humans all have so much in common once we scratch under the surface.
Be a mirror for each other.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And we are a lot of times because I was told by my minister, I think, that usually if there's a person you don't like, it's because there's something about them that you have that,
It could be. It could be. I find people who remind me of my mother are the people I
oh,
really
there
don't.
you go. Well, that would happen too. That
Yeah.
happened too. But that's oh my gosh. Yeah, my mother was very cold. She wasn't the huggy, touchy feely mother. But so what do you have in plans for your career? Anything new you're going to be doing?
Yeah, I've just been putting out a lot of content on my podcast lately. So working on that, and then I'm trying actually to get some of my research published in a
Oh,
peer-reviewed journal. Yeah,
well, if you ever need a guest, I'm sure I could fit in with
I
a
know.
lot.
You have a great
You know,
story.
did you read my book or I don't know if I
I
sent it
did.
to you.
Yes,
Oh, you
thank you.
did. Oh, you
Yes,
did read it. Did you read it?
I did. Yeah,
And
I
what
told
did
you
you?
I would.
Oh, yeah, I believe you. And what did you think of it?
I love that you wrote this. I feel like so few people of your age category are honest about themselves, about what they went through, and have that level of transparency. We're seeing it more like my daughter, who's 21, in like the new generation. People just are just more open about things. And I love that. And like Mimi, honestly, you're like, I don't have clients. Probably, I think my oldest client is still in her 60s. So it's so rare to see people, you know, at your age really just being so honest and transparent. And I so appreciate that. And I feel like I just wish more people were open like you. And I think you are serving a niche for
Thank you.
people of your age group. I think
Mhm.
you're like a vanguard, really.
And you know, it's funny. The thing is, I had a 16-year-old boy buy my book and read it, and he follows me on Instagram. And
Mhm.
I found that out by accident from my grandson. And that took me aback because, like you said, he probably read the book because he knew he was friends with my grandson. So it's his grandmother.
Yeah.
He, my grandson said, he is your biggest fan.
Mhm.
And because, the things I went through, even if it was 50 years ago, there's kids still going through that.
Oh, there's so many kids going through it. That's
And that's why they can relate. Doesn't matter if it was 1965 or, 2025,
humans
and
are humans.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, this was very good. I learned a lot of things. I always do when I talk to you. And
Thank you.
I think that this interview gave us a very comprehensive understanding of the different types of mental health and effective therapy. We really did. We scratched more than the surface, I think. This is,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah. Well, thank you for coming. And I'm serious. I would love to be on your podcast. I really would. And you could talk about any part of my life because everybody in the world can, because I put it out in a book.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's so cool.
Yeah, cool at 76. That was my aim. All
Yes.
right. Thanks again for coming, Brown. And I hope everyone got as much out of this than I did because I just got so much. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Mimi. Thanks for having me.
Anytime.